Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, and each week I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another, and bring them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I am thrilled this week to have my friend and special guest, Tron Young, on with me. Thank you so much for being here, man. Tell everybody kind of who you are.
Well, I am Tron Young. I'm principal at Joseph Arthur Middle School in O'Fallon, Illinois. Born and raised here in the Midwest. About 38 years old and been middle school my entire career.
I love it. Well, anytime I have any guests on and we find out what career they're doing, my first question is always, of course, thinking back to when you were a kid. Did you know that you were built to be an educator, or was it something you kind of had to fall into a different way?
I tell you what, so I always knew or played school, right? So I always played school and summer break, like took worksheets from my teachers and played with my cousins. And then as I got older, middle school, high school, I was thought either I wanted to be a teacher or a lawyer. So that was one of the two options. One, I thought lawyer because I thought, hey, I want to make a lot of money, but teaching because I absolutely loved helping out and teaching, and I volunteered as a tutor and all those other things. And then I realized I couldn't be a lawyer that defended people that I knew was wrong. So that just went out the door, and I was like, nope, all right, let's just jump full force into being an educator. So that's kind of what it was. If you ask, my family and friends, they will say, oh, you've always were born to be a teacher. But I don't know. I do love this thing called education, though.
Well, it's so funny the way you talk about what kind of pushed you away from being a lawyer, because myself, I've often thought, like, how can lawyers defend somebody they know is guilty,
Right.
but it's for their job? And so when you find out that I can't really do that, then it's good to know before you go to all the school and everything. So, Tron, you mentioned you were a middle school. Have you always been drawn to that age?
You know what? I have. So I did have my first year as a principal. I was an elementary principal. I went kicking and screaming, kind of what I say as a principal. My superintendent talked me into it. And it was probably the best decision because I learned everything that I believe about procedures and about processes, I learned not as a teacher, but as my 1 year as a middle school principal, because there's a procedure and process for everything in an elementary building.
Oh,
yeah. But it was, my roughest year as a student was my 6th grade year. And I had a teacher that took me to the verge and my edge that I just didn't believe it was worth it anymore. Right. And after my 6th grade year, I decided that time I would never allow someone else to control my emotions and control who I am. And it was like, once I had that epiphany, the sky was a limit, and it was rough. And as I starting worrying about or thinking about education, middle school was what I was always drawn to, because I feel like elementary kids, I couldn't have as much of a heart-to-heart conversation that I want to. And high schoolers, sometimes it's a little too late, right? Yeah. But if I could catch them in the middle and plant a seed, I believe that it could grow.
I love that. And, it's so funny what you said about being an elementary principal that 1 year and realizing the importance of all the processes whenever an elementary does that. Because I have talked to so many secondary administrators who mention that when they did a year or a year or two in elementary, that was the number one thing they saw. Was like, y'all have a plan for everything. I'm like, yeah, that's how elementary works. And you got littles on board, you got to be ready, because those parents have 1,000 questions about everything.
They do.
Well, being in middle school now for many years, what do you love most about it? I know you mentioned the heart-to-heart conversations, and that was what drew you to that age, but what do you love most being an administrator of middle schoolers?
I think I love, like, they're little big kids, right? I love that, like, they're not afraid to kind of take a chance. They're not afraid to, like, tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. And little kids are honest, but when it comes to a middle school, like, like, it's not cute anymore. You're like, are you really? But then you have to think, like, yeah, it wasn't very nice at that time. Or, yeah, I do normally have a smile on, but there's something that they notice, and they watch your every move. I love that they're so impressionable, and that they're folding everything in and trying to learn all that, and helping them to kind of unfold it, right? To unpack it, and them to see, like, here's your truth, and here's who you are, and here's your full potential. I love that. I love those heart to heart kind of meaningful, purposeful conversations that I get to have with my kids. That in high school you have them, but man, it's just, I don't know. I've never worked in a high school, so I can't say exactly how it is. I've
Right.
mentored kids, but it is. I mean, I do. I love it. Like, I'm starting to get more kids back in my building, and every day I have a kid that I'm in here. And I'm like, talk to me. How's it going? What's wrong with your grades? How was your summer? Like, we're just unpacking things and having those conversations. And I believe it's those small little things that like really makes a big impact at the end.
I couldn't agree more. And I love that that's the perspective you have. And, with the work that you've been doing, you've started getting some recognition lately and some different awards or things like that. And I know that even when those kind of things happen, and even when you feel like you had a successful day or a successful year, that whole idea and concept of doubt is always still present, and that whole comparison idea. So
Right.
you being somebody who has felt the taste of success, has seen some of that rewarded in different ways, how do you battle and keep doubt at bay?
You know, it's hard because people would see me and they were like, man, you're always so positive. You're always so, and I am, because I believe glasses half full, but you're right. Like, you have those moments. And a lot of times I realize that there has been strength in showing that.
Yeah.
Right. So showing that doubt, especially during this time, like showing that, like, do I feel like I'm doing what's right? And do I feel like it is? I was reading something the other day. It was like the toxic positivity, right? And it was like, am I that person? Is that? But I also feel like I also have that conversation of like, sometimes I wonder, am I doing right? Am I doing enough? Is this enough? And I think the way I handle those things is I stop, and in those moments that I have those real hard doubts and those hard conversations that sometimes bring you to tears, like you just wonder if you're in the right spot, if you're doing the right thing. I go down and I make a list about all the positive things or the positive impact, and I have my little notebook of positive letters that I have to go to, and I have to fill that bucket in that way. And it always happens that when I am on that curve, there is something that like scoops me back up, that because during this time I was having that, and then I got an email from one of my students that's a junior and was like, hey, I know I told you I wanted to be a graphic engineer, but I don't know if that's what I want to do. And I was just wondering, like, who could I talk to about it? And I just remember those conversations we had and how you put on your wall. And I was like, see, this is why I do what I do. Like, this is why you spend that time and you have those hard conversations. Because I didn't know that it mattered. I told him at the one time, I felt like it was going in one ear, not the other. But I'm glad that he heard, and I'm glad that he turned to me. And whether I helped him solve his career decision. I was like, you're a junior in high school. It's going to change 4 more times before you actually graduate college. So it's okay. Like, you're in the right spot. At least you're thinking about it.
Yeah. And it's so funny because that's the hard part of being an elementary or middle school educator, is that you don't see the effects necessarily right away all the time. They come many years down the road. But I love the idea you shared there in there when you were talking, because what you shared in there was one of the best pieces of advice I was given my first year teaching. And my mentor teacher said, Todd, what you need to do is every single kind email, note, whatever, put it in a file, in a folder. She said, because you may be like on cloud 9 today and thinking you're killing it, but you are going to have bad days. And that's when you can go pull that folder out and go look at the work I'm doing, even though I lost sight of it today.
Right.
So I love that advice that you shared there. Well, Tron, you are a male in a female dominated field, but you're also a man of color. And so you've got a lot of preconceptions that come about you, and a lot of things that you get to set the standard for kids who don't often get to see men like you in the positions you're in. And so how has that impacted the decisions you make and the steps you take forward?
I tell you, it's funny you say that, because I truly, I don't take my position lightly. I do feel like there's a weight sometimes being a educator, a male educator, and on top of being a black male educator.
Right.
And I believe it's a weight in two different ways. I feel like as a black male educator coming into a conversation in a field that's predominantly white and predominantly female, that when I'm in the room, the conversation has to change, right? The conversation is inherently different. And if that conversation isn't inherently different, then am I being that thermostat or making that impact that I believe that I am making? I should bring another perspective. I should bring another opportunity to see things. But then also, I think it's a weight sometimes being the only male, the only in my area African American male in that conversation and in that room, and in my district the only African American certified educator in a district that is 54% African American. It makes it challenging. Like it sometimes you're afraid of being said that you are only worried about those kids are playing that card or having that kind of conversation. And it took a while to have that courage, I will be honest, as a leader, to step in that room and have those hard, honest conversations. I never shied away from a hard conversation, but I may have avoided or went around the topic. But it hitting that conversation and having that conversation on hand, it's hard because coming from me, it's often heard differently if it comes from someone else who doesn't look like me, who hasn't had those same experiences. But it's also letting people know, like, those experiences that people talk about, they're real, they're lived. And how do I know that? Because here are my lived and real experiences, and here's how I have learned, or here's that conversation that this parent will have with me based off of perception, because I truly believe perception becomes reality. Whether it is or not, if people perceive it, it is their current reality. And how do we change perceptions is huge. So it's heavy. I mean, it really is heavy. And my wife said something to me about a month ago, and I was up late doing something, and she goes, not everyone is doing what you're doing, but I see the weight and I see your excellence. And that it meant a lot, like that someone who sees me on an everyday basis, like you're doing this not because you have to, but because I know you know your weight, and I know that you feel the excellence that's on you. And I'm like, well, I appreciate that. Like, it's nice to know that, like, this sacrifice of staying up late and doing that, but it is heavy sometimes. It is making sure that, I feel like I also have to make sure that I look apart and I act apart, because not only are my teachers watching, but my students are watching. My students are having, that opportunity to see success and have someone speak into their life, I think, on a daily basis that understands them. And not that if you're not a minority, you can't understand a student, because you can. Right. But I also say that it's something about seeing someone and seeing them for them, and they know that you see them for them, and so that doubt just creeps in, whether it's a societal place or just in general.
You said a lot in there that really struck me. One of the things particularly was being the only certified educator who is Black in your district. That is wild to me. So I can imagine the weight, because I think that's something white educators take for granted, is that they always see other people that, well, not always, but most of the time they're going to see somebody who looks like them, or people who come from a different religion are always going to have somebody the same as like that. But being the only one, like you said, it does add a whole nother level of pressure, not only that you may feel put on for you by society or by your district, but that you're putting on yourself.
Right.
And I so clearly remember we had started a diversity group at our school to really help us make sure that we were doing things that were reflective of all the communities that we served. And one of my Black female teachers came to me and she said, that conversation we had today? She said, that's why we need more teachers of color. She said, because it's not that they're better or they're worse. She goes, but it's what our kids see. She said, because if my little kids come on this campus and the only people of color they see are serving as a cafeteria worker or serving as a volunteer or serving as this or that, they don't believe that they can move up the ranks and see
Right.
themselves in those other positions too. And that was something that it had never crossed my mind, because being a white male, I took for granted the fact that I'd always send people like me in all kinds
Yeah.
of positions. And so that hit me right then when you said, just making sure that not only the parents and educators see you, but the kids can see you and see the example you set for them and see the work you do and the joy you bring and all that kind of stuff. So I know that that's a powerful image for them to have. Growing up in your own life, did you have somebody who was that powerful person for you, or who really made a really big impact on growing you?
Absolutely. And I tell you, she hates when I talk about her, but every time I get a chance to, I will talk about her. It's my fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Judy Truitt. I mean, she's why I will say 100%, she is why I'm the educator I am today. It is because of her. She made you feel loved no matter who you were, white, female, and just if she showed up to your baseball games, basketball games, chorus concerts, send your cards in the mail, and like just loved you for you. And still to this day, she's my mother. She's my best friend. She likes frogs. And so if you see, when I was in my classroom, she brought me my very first frog, stuffed frog, when I was in high school, and I won an award or something and had it. And so I keep the guy. His name is Freddie. Tell the kids he's my best friend. And so when I was teaching, I told the kids, if you want to buy me anything, just buy me a stuffed frog. You get the name, I'll keep it forever. And it always remind me of being like Mr. Truitt, right? Like continue to be like Mr. Truitt. And so I had about 350 frogs by the time I transitioned to principal. And then I started giving away my elementary year. But I still have a set few to come in there. And it's purposeful, right? So I keep one, I wear them on my shoulders sometimes, but also reminding my middle schoolers, like, you're still a child. Yeah. So it's okay to come in. If you're upset, take your frog, hold on to them, throw them. I don't care what you need to do, but still like embrace that. You have your rest of your life to be an adult. But I tell you, she wrote in my yearbook, and I still remember, Tron, you're a great who you are. Never let anyone change you. Oh. And I keep those words true and true. And she's just been there. She was at my graduation, at my wedding, at the hospital when I had my baby. Like she is my second mother. And she'll stop by my school every so often, and she'll talk to my teachers, make sure I'm treating them right.
I love it. I love when we can think of those specific examples of somebody who was so instrumental in so many ways to creating the person we are. Well, Tron, we're also, people who are listening this around the time when it releases knows that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and being an educator, in addition to many walks of life, has changed dramatically. And there's a lot of additional pressures and things like that. How do you maintain hope and positivity in the midst of overwhelming uncertainty?
I think it's difficult because there's so many. I think the challenge during this time is, so we're completely remote, and as educators, we get our buckets filled by our students. So as our students come in and they remember something, or they tell you a story and you have that connection, or they're excited to show you the new puppy they got, or whatever it is, or tell you about the game that they played, those things fill your bucket, that relational bucket, which allows for you to have that energy to do what you do in your classroom. And it's hard when it's remote to get that bucket filled, because you're worrying about switching your teaching. You're worrying about the kids who are not logging in, or the kids who aren't doing your work, and finding different ways to fill your bucket. So my goal has literally been trying to find ways for not only to fill the kids' bucket, but trying to fill my teacher's bucket in those ways. And trying to do just different things that keep us connected and cohesive, as you can't have potlucks because, it's COVID, right? So, my secretary playing a cookie competition where everybody baked individual cookies, put them in bags, and you got to guess them, and trying to do those fun little things. Found out there's one district around me that did something that I'm going to try to copy, the Masked Singer, where you have different people singing and you have just a picture of the costume on there, and having students and teachers guess to see who it is. And
I love that.
yeah, right. I'm like, oh, this is great. So just trying to fill those buckets on a daily basis is hard. And really telling my teachers, like, it's one day at a time, right? Like, do our best, what we can do for today, because you're doing the best. You are the right teachers for our kids on a daily basis, and just continue to remind them, but also being realistic. I mean, being very honest that I understand this is hard. This is not easy. This is not what you signed up for. I get it. And no one should say this is normal are going to be our normal, because it's not. But we're doing what we always do, make the best out of a worst case situation, but continue. And the number one thing I told them is continue with relationships. Yeah. Relationships, relevance, results. I truly believe it. Have those relationships and you be relevant, you get those results that you need.
I love that. Well, Tron, as we wrap this up, one question that I always love to end these conversations on is your one thing. If you want people to walk away with one thing today, what would your one thing be for them?
My one thing for them would be the thermostat and not the thermometer. Be the person who sets the temperature in the room, not just the person who reads the temperature in the room.
I love that. Well, man, I think you are doing incredible work, and thank you so much for spending a little time with me today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being on here.
And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. It's there. I hope today's conversation with Tron has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.